Years of silence, one fence, one cowboy. Her waiting finally ended. Emily Dawson had lived in Ridridge her entire life, a small town that stretched along the edge of golden fields and dusty roads. The town wasn't busy like the cities she had sometimes visited, and the pace of life here moved slowly, as if the wind itself decided when it would hurry and when it would linger. Emily liked it that way. There was comfort in the familiarity, the faces she passed every morning, the way the sun rose behind the hills and cast a warm glow over the Dawson Ranch, and the quiet hum of life that seemed to exist in a place untouched by hurry. Yet even in the calm, there was a hollow space in her heart, a space that had grown wider with every year that Luke Harper, the boy she had loved since childhood, had been gone. Every morning, Emily would step out onto the porch, breathe in the crisp country air, and let her eyes drift toward the old wooden fence at the edge of her property. It was a long, weathered fence, the kind that had seen generations come and go, its wood sun-bleached and rough under her fingertips. As a child, she had spent countless hours sitting on that fence, swinging her legs, talking to Luke as if the whole world existed only in those small moments. That fence had held laughter, secrets, and dreams, a silent witness to their friendship, their first love, and the promises they had made under starlit skies. Now it stood as a reminder of years of silence. Emily's father had passed away when she was only 24, leaving her with the ranch and a sense of responsibility heavier than she had imagined she could carry. The Dawson Ranch was not huge, but it was enough to keep her busy from dawn to dusk. There were fields to tend, fences to repair, and cattle to watch over. Some days the work gave her a sense of purpose, other days it felt like a quiet loneliness pressing in from all sides. She had friends in town, neighbors who dropped by with homemade pies or a kind smile, but none of that could fill the space left by Luke's absence. It had been 10 long years since she last heard from him. 10 years without a letter, a phone call, or even a passing mention. She remembered the day he had left as if it had happened yesterday. He had said he needed to leave Ridridge to find work out west, promising to write, promising to come back. And then, nothing. At first, Emily had believed the letters were just delayed, that one day a letter would arrive and her heart would soar again. But day after day, month after month, year after year, there was only silence. She didn't even know if he thought of her, or if the promises made under the old oak tree had been forgotten like footprints in the sand. Despite the emptiness, Emily found ways to hold on. She would visit the fence every morning, tracing the rough wood with her fingers, remembering the way his smile had lit up the summer evenings, the way his voice had sounded when he teased her about the smallest things. She kept a small box hidden under her bed, filled with letters she had never sent him, letters that spoke of her thoughts, her hopes, and her longing. She never sent them, not out of pride, not out of fear, but because writing them made her feel close to him, even if the world insisted he was gone. Her life in Ridridge was simple but not empty. She tended a small garden where sunflowers grew taller than she did, planted by her own careful hands. She helped the neighbors with chores, attending the local farmers' market on weekends, and sometimes volunteering at the town's little library. People admired her resilience and her kindness, though few could guess the ache she carried quietly within her heart. She learned to smile, to laugh at the right moments, and to carry herself with grace. But every evening, when the stars appeared above the hills and the wind whispered through the trees, she allowed herself the quiet sadness that came with memories. The townspeople often told her she was too young to carry such grief, too young to spend her life waiting for someone who might never return. "Life has a way of moving on, Emily," they would say, but they didn't understand. They didn't know that hope, no matter how quiet, can survive 10 years of absence. They didn't know that every passing season, every change in the wind could remind her of him. The way he used to ride his horse across the fields, his hat tilted just slightly as he waved at her, that boyish grin that never seemed to fade. Some days Emily would catch herself speaking to the fence, almost as if it could answer back. "Where are you, Luke?" she would whisper, her voice carried off by the wind. "Why didn't you write? Why did you leave?" She knew the fence couldn't reply, yet the act of speaking gave her comfort. She imagined the fence listening, holding her words in its worn wood like the years it had stood guard over the Dawson family. It was her connection to the past, to a time when life had seemed simpler, when laughter had been a constant companion, and when the world felt full of possibilities. The seasons changed, as they always did. Summers brought golden light that seemed to set the fields on fire, and Emily would spend long hours repairing fences and tending to the crops. Autumn came with cooler winds and leaves that painted the hills in red, orange, and gold, reminding her of the first time she and Luke had carved their initials into the fence under the autumn sun. Winter's snow would blanket the town, making the world quiet and still, giving her time to think and remember. Spring brought hope in the form of new blooms, and yet every year she found herself hoping for something more. A sign, a letter, anything to tell her that he remembered her too. Emily's friends sometimes encouraged her to travel, to leave Redridge, to see what the world could offer beyond the fence and the familiar fields. She thought about it often, dreaming of cities with lights that never dimmed and streets that hummed with life. But every time she considered leaving, her gaze would drift toward the fence, and she couldn't bring herself to go. That fence, weathered and splintered, was not just wood. It was history, memory, and hope all intertwined. To leave it would feel like leaving him behind again, even if he might never return. Her life became a quiet rhythm, a cycle of work and reflection, of care and remembrance. She learned the value of patience, the beauty of small joys, and the strength it took to endure absence without letting it consume her entirely. Every morning as she walked past the fence, she whispered a small prayer, not only for Luke but for herself, for the courage to continue, for the wisdom to cherish what remained, and for the hope that one day the silence would be broken. And though 10 years of silence could have hardened her heart, it had not. Emily remained tender, capable of deep feeling, and quietly courageous. She carried memories not as burdens, but as treasures, evidence of a love that had touched her life profoundly, even in its absence. She never forgot the boy who had once leaned against the fence, whispering promises beneath the stars. She never gave up hope, because hope, she knew, was not easily destroyed. It was a quiet flame that burned steadily, even in the darkest nights. The Dawson Ranch stood as a testament to her endurance, the fence at its edge as a silent companion to her waiting. Emily knew that life could be unpredictable, that people came and went, that silence could stretch on for years. But she also knew that love, genuine and true, had a way of returning when the time was right. Until that moment came, she would walk past the fence each morning, greet the rising sun, and hold on to the memories that had shaped her, believing quietly and steadfastly that some promises were worth waiting for. And so Emily Dawson began another day, stepping out onto the porch, letting the wind carry her hair and her thoughts, and gazing at the fence that had witnessed a lifetime of memories. The world around her was simple, sometimes harsh, sometimes beautiful, but always real. And in her heart she nurtured a hope that had survived 10 long years, a hope that one day the silence would end, and that the boy who had once promised forever might finally return. The memories of Luke Harper burned vividly in Emily Dawson's mind, like the embers of a fire she could never quite let die. Each memory was tied to the old fence at the edge of the Dawson Ranch. It had been their playground, their hiding place, and their witness to the promises they had made as children and young adults. Emily could still hear his laughter echoing through the fields on warm summer days, see his dark hair ruffled by the wind, and feel the warmth of the hand he had once held so casually, as if the world around them was too big, too chaotic, and too loud for their quiet little town. She remembered the day he had taught her how to ride his old horse, Dusty. He had been patient, guiding her hands on the reins, telling her to trust the horse and to trust herself. Emily's heart had been racing with excitement and fear, but Luke's calm voice had anchored her. "You're doing fine, Emily," he had said, smiling. "You just have to believe." And she had believed in the horse, in herself, and in him. Those moments had left impressions on her heart that years of silence could not erase. Sometimes Emily would wander through the fields alone, letting her fingers brush against the tall grass, imagining that Luke was still beside her. She would laugh softly to herself when she remembered the small tricks he used to play, like tying her shoelaces together just before a race, only to untangle them with a flourish and a wink. The town had laughed at them back then, at the endless teasing and playful arguments, but Emily cherished every second. Those playful days had been simple, full of joy and trust, and full of the kind of love that didn't require words. Yet with every fond memory came the ache of absence. Luke had vanished 10 years ago, leaving only silence in his wake. Emily still remembered the day he left like it had been yesterday. He had kissed her forehead gently and whispered that he had to go to work in the West, that he would write and return. Emily had smiled through her tears, promising to wait, and then the letters stopped. Every day that passed without a word from him felt heavier than the day before, and she sometimes wondered if he had ever truly cared, or if their childhood promises had been nothing more than whispers in the wind. Despite the pain, Emily refused to give up on hope. She had learned the delicate art of carrying grief alongside hope, of remembering someone without letting it consume her completely. Each morning, she walked past the old fence, letting her hands brush the worn wood as if she could feel him through it. She would whisper to the wind, "I'm still here, Luke, I'm still waiting." The fence seemed to respond in its own silent way, standing tall through storms, through scorching sun, through years of change. It was steadfast, and Emily drew strength from its endurance. Her daily life was full but quiet. She tended the farm with meticulous care, repairing fences, feeding the cattle, and tending to the small garden where she grew sunflowers and vegetables. She helped neighbors with their chores and visited the town's small library on rainy days, reading stories that reminded her of adventures she had never taken, but had imagined with Luke by her side. She found satisfaction in these simple routines, even if they did not replace the companionship she longed for. Emily's heart remained tender, capable of deep feelings, and she never allowed herself to close off completely. She knew that holding on to love, even one that seemed lost, wasn't weakness. It was strength. She had seen others rush to forget the people who had mattered most to them, and she could not imagine erasing Luke from her life. He was a part of her, woven into her memories like the threads of a quilt she could never discard. Some days, she found herself tracing the letters she had never sent, writing words she would never share, and sealing them in envelopes she tucked under her bed. These letters were a way to speak to him without risking disappointment. She wrote about her days, about the farm, about the changing seasons, and about how much she had missed him. Writing these letters allowed her to feel close to him, even when life seemed lonely. She wrote about the small victories and the quiet sorrows, the moments that made her laugh and the moments that made her heart ache. Each word was a bridge across the years of silence. Emily often found herself thinking about the what-ifs. What if he had gone somewhere he couldn't write? What if life had been too hard for him to reach out? What if he had forgotten? These questions lingered in her mind, sometimes keeping her awake at night. But she also reminded herself that love was resilient, and the heart had a way of remembering even when the mind tried to forget. She held on to the hope that somehow, someway, he would return. The people of Ridge often encouraged her to move on, to let go of someone who might never come back. "You're young, Emily," they would say. "You deserve happiness now, not waiting for someone from the past." But she knew they didn't understand. It wasn't about clinging to the past. It was about honoring a love that had shaped her life. Every memory, every laughter, every promise had left its mark, and she couldn't erase that mark without erasing a part of herself. Her friends often tried to cheer her up, inviting her to social gatherings or small town dances, hoping she would find someone new. Emily would smile politely, but she would always return home to the ranch, to the fence, and to the memories she could abandon. It wasn't stubbornness, it was devotion. It was the kind of love that required patience and courage, a belief that some bonds, no matter how stretched by distance or time, could never truly break. Some evenings, she would stand by the fence long after the sun had set, watching the stars twinkle above the fields. She would close her eyes and imagine Luke standing beside her, his hand brushing hers, the warmth of his presence filling the quiet spaces around her. She could almost hear his voice, soft and teasing, reminding her not to take life too seriously. And even though he wasn't there, the act of imagining him brought her comfort. It kept her hope alive, a gentle flame that refused to go out. Emily knew that her life was shaped as much by absence as by presence. The years of silence had taught her resilience, patience, and the beauty of small joys. She had learned to appreciate the rhythm of life on the ranch, the satisfaction of a day's hard work, and the quiet pride in keeping her father's legacy alive. The fence, the fields, and the golden sunsets became her companions, steadying her heart and reminding her that some things, like memories and hope, were timeless. She often thought about the boy Luke had been and the man he might have become. He had left with dreams of work and adventure, and she hoped that life had treated him kindly, that he had found joy and safety in the years he was away. She didn't harbor anger or resentment, only longing. And deep down, a quiet certainty that one day, perhaps, fate would lead him back to the fence where their story had begun. Even in her solitude, Emily's heart remained open. She continued to nurture her friendships, lend a helping hand, and share kindness wherever she could. Her laughter, though quieter than it had once been, was still genuine. Her eyes, though sometimes shadowed with longing, still sparkled when she found joy in simple moments. The town of Ridridge knew her as a woman of patience, of quiet strength, and of unwavering loyalty. But only Emily knew the depth of her waiting, the years spent holding on to a hope that seemed fragile, yet enduring. As the seasons passed, Emily noticed subtle signs that kept her heart alive. An old horse passing by the fence as if leading someone toward home, a sudden gust of wind carrying the scent of hay and distant wildflowers, or the faint echo of a laugh that sounded like Luke's in the distance. Each small moment made her pulse quicken, made her remember that life could be full of surprises, that the past and the present were never truly separate, and that hope had a way of finding its place in the heart when least expected. Emily Dawson's life was quiet, sometimes lonely, but full of memories and hope. The fence at the edge of her ranch stood as a symbol of what she had loved, lost, and never given up on. It held laughter and tears, promises and secrets, and it reminded her daily of the boy who had shaped her childhood, the young man who had left, and the possibility that one day he might return. She would continue to walk past the fence, tend the fields, and whisper her prayers to the wind, believing in the enduring power of love and the quiet magic of hope. Every day, Emily nurtured that flame within her, knowing that the years of silence, though long and sometimes painful, had not extinguished the love she held in her heart. She believed that one day that silence would be broken, and when it was, she would be ready to embrace it fully. Until then, she lived, loved, remembered, and waited, with patience, grace, and a hope that refused to fade. One crisp autumn morning, Emily Dawson stepped out onto the porch as usual, her hands clutching a warm cup of tea. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the faint aroma of distant pine. It was a peaceful morning, like so many others she had lived through, yet something felt different. The light had a sharper glow, the sky seemed whiter, and the sound of hooves on dirt, distant at first, made her heart beat faster. She paused, listening. The sound was steady, deliberate, not the casual clip-clop of a passing rider, but measured, confident, and familiar. Emily's mind raced. Could it be her imagination? Perhaps a neighbor riding through the fields or a rancher from the outskirts of town. Still, the rhythm of the hooves struck a chord deep within her memory, one she hadn't felt in years. She set her cup down and walked toward the edge of the yard, where the old wooden fence stretched across the horizon. Her eyes scanned the distance, squinting against the bright morning sun, and her breath caught in her throat. There, emerging from a cloud of dust and golden sunlight, was a horse. And riding the horse, with the posture and confidence she remembered so well, was Luke Harper. Emily froze, her heart pounding in a way that made her ears ring. He looked taller than she remembered, stronger, more grown, yet unmistakably him. The same dark hair falling just so, the same familiar hat tilted at a slight angle. He was riding straight toward her, down the winding path that led past the fields and the old fence, the dust of the earth trailing behind him like a ribbon. For a moment, Emily couldn't move. 10 years of longing, of hope mixed with despair, of nights spent imagining his return, all surged forward at once. She blinked rapidly, half wondering if the years of waiting had played tricks on her mind. But as he came closer, she saw the determination in his stride, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, and the unmistakable curve of his smile. It was him. Luke Harper had returned. Memories flooded her mind, unbidden and powerful. She remembered the first time he had held her hand as they leaned on this very fence, the laughter that had spilled across the fields, and the quiet conversations beneath the stars. The boy who had run through these fields chasing butterflies, who had whispered promises of forever under the old oak tree, was now a man riding back into her life. Her heart ached with a mixture of disbelief, joy, and the years of absence that still lingered in the corners of her soul. Luke slowed as he approached the fence, dismounting with ease. His boots hit the ground softly, and he ran a hand through his hair, scanning the area until his eyes locked with hers. Time seemed to stretch, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Emily felt her breath catch, her chest tightening as the weight of the years of waiting pressed down, yet in the same moment lifted with the realization that he had returned. He had come back. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the familiar lines of the ranch, the fence, and finally settling on her. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying across the fields. It was the voice she had remembered, gentle and strong, carrying both warmth and the gravity of the years apart. "Emily, it's been a long time." Tears threatened to spill, and she blinked rapidly, forcing herself to remain composed. "Luke, I can't believe it," she whispered, her voice trembling. She took a cautious step forward, almost afraid that if she moved too quickly, the moment might vanish. The fence, that silent witness to their childhood memories and her years of waiting, now seemed to stand between them like a bridge and a barrier at once. Luke extended a hand, but it hesitated, almost shyly, as though unsure if she would take it. Emily's hand trembled as she placed hers in his, and the touch was electric, carrying with it the weight of 10 years, the longing, the love, and the unanswered questions. "I never meant to disappear," he said, his voice low, carrying a tinge of regret. "I had to go, but I never stopped thinking about you, not for a day." Emily's heart thudded painfully in her chest. The years of unanswered letters, the nights spent imagining him, the hope that had kept her going, all of it condensed into this moment. She wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions at once, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she let her eyes communicate the depth of her feelings, the relief, the joy, the lingering sadness, and the hope that had never truly died. For a few long minutes, they simply stood there, hand in hand, letting the silence speak. The wind rustled the fence posts, the leaves shimmered in the sunlight, and somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, as if announcing that something long awaited had finally arrived. Emily realized that the fence had done more than hold memories. It had held hope, patiently waiting for this very moment. Luke finally spoke again, a small, almost embarrassed smile crossing his face. "You're still here, and you've kept everything just as it was." He gestured to the fence, the fields, the little details of the ranch that had not changed. "I always worried that I had left too much behind." Emily laughed softly, a sound that carried the relief and joy she felt. "I kept it because it mattered," she said. "Because you mattered, and I waited, I hoped." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of 10 years of longing, love, and patience. Luke nodded, his eyes misty. "I can't imagine what you've gone through waiting all these years." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm sorry I disappeared, but I'm here now, and I want to make up for it." The tension that had built over years of separation began to ease. They began walking slowly along the fence, talking in low voices, sharing pieces of their lives that had been missing from each other's worlds. Luke spoke of the work he had done out west, the towns he had visited, the challenges he had faced, and the nights he had spent thinking of Emily. Emily shared her experiences on the ranch, the challenges of managing the farm alone, and the quiet moments of reflection that had kept her connected to him despite his absence. With every word, with every glance, the distance between them seemed to shrink. They laughed at old memories, recalled childhood mischief, and quietly admitted the fears and doubts they had carried. The fence, once a symbol of absence, now felt like a bridge between the past and the present, linking two hearts that had never truly let go. Emily felt a mixture of emotions, joy, relief, and a sense of grounding she hadn't realized she had missed. It was as though a missing piece of her life had returned, and the world felt suddenly fuller, brighter, and more alive. The past 10 years had been long and difficult, but standing here with Luke, she realized that the waiting, the silence, and the hope had all led to this very moment. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden light across the fields, Emily and Luke walked together along the fence. They spoke of small plans, of future hopes, and of the slow rebuilding of a connection that had never truly faded. The wind played through the fields, carrying with it the scent of fresh grass and the distant sound of flowing water. Emily breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs and her heart. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. The years of silence, the long nights, the aching longing, all of it was beginning to dissolve, replaced with the warmth of presence, the certainty of return, and the promise of a future shared. She realized that life, despite its unpredictability, had a way of bringing the right people back at the right time. And Luke Harper, the boy who had once run through these fields chasing butterflies, was finally here. The day stretched on, the light shifting and softening as afternoon approached. Emily felt a calm she had not known in years, a quiet happiness that came not from the end of waiting alone, but from the knowledge that the bond she and Luke shared had survived the test of time. They talked, laughed, and walked together, the old fence standing as a silent witness to the reunion that had seemed impossible for so long. Emily Dawson realized something profound that day, that hope, no matter how fragile it seems, can endure the harshest seasons. That love, when true, can survive distance, silence, and the passage of years. And that sometimes the universe has a way of returning what is meant to be, exactly when it is needed most. The horse Dusty nickered softly nearby, the sun kissed the earth with a golden glow, and the fields seemed to hum with quiet approval. Emily and Luke stood together, leaning against the fence, and for the first time in a decade, the world felt complete. The waiting had not been in vain, the silence had not been forever, and the bond that had started as childhood friendship blossomed into first love, and endured 10 long years, was finally whole again. After that first morning of reunion, Emily Dawson and Luke Harper spent the rest of the day walking along the edges of the Dawson Ranch. The old wooden fence, weathered and splintered, no longer felt like a barrier but a bridge connecting their past and present. Every post and every knot in the wood carried memories of their childhood and youth. Emily felt a strange mix of relief and nervousness. The years apart had left unspoken words, questions that needed answers, and emotions that had built up silently over a decade. Luke seemed to feel the same tension, though he hid it behind the familiar smile she remembered so well. He pointed out small changes he noticed, the new flower beds Emily had planted, the repaired sections of the fence, and the little touches she had made around the property to keep it alive and welcoming. "You've done a wonderful job," he said softly. "Everything looks perfect, just like I remembered, only better." His voice carried admiration, but also a hint of guilt, as if he still felt responsible for the years of absence. Emily smiled gently. "I've kept it alive, Luke, not just the land, but the memories. Everything mattered too much to let go." Her words carried more than pride. They carried the years of waiting, the nights of doubt, and the hope that had never fully faded. She realized that the moment was no longer just about reunion. It was about rebuilding, understanding, and reclaiming what had been paused for 10 long years. As they walked together, they found a quiet spot under the old oak tree near the corner of the ranch, where they had carved their initials as teenagers. The carving had faded, but it was still there, faintly etched into the bark. Luke traced it with his finger, a small smile crossing his face. "I remember when we did this," he said. "We thought we'd always be young and foolish and that nothing could ever change." Emily laughed softly, a sound that was both joyful and wistful. "We were young, yes. But we weren't foolish, we were just us." She looked at him, feeling the weight of the years behind her and the presence of the man before her. "I never stopped thinking about you, Luke, not once." His eyes softened, and he reached for her hand again. "I never stopped thinking about you either, Emily. Every day, every decision I made out west, I thought of you. I worried you'd forget me, or worse, that you'd move on without me." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion he tried to contain. "I know I caused you pain. I'm sorry for that, more than I can ever say." Emily felt a lump in her throat but didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand, letting him know that she had waited not out of anger but out of love. "I waited because I believed in you. I believed in us. And I'm glad you're here now." Her voice was steady, though her heart raced with the mixture of relief and hope she had carried for so long. They sat there under the tree, sharing stories of the years apart. Luke spoke of the towns he had visited, the work he had done on ranches across the West, and the nights he had spent dreaming of returning to Ridge. Emily shared her experiences running the Dawson Ranch, the challenges she faced alone, and the quiet moments when she had whispered his name to the wind, hoping he could somehow hear. As they talked, the years of absence seemed to shrink, replaced by a deep understanding that neither of them had truly let go. Laughter returned naturally, along with gentle teasing and shared memories. They recalled old pranks, adventures, and small joys that had made their youth magical. Even the simple act of sharing a meal later, made from the fresh vegetables and baked bread Emily had prepared, felt like a celebration of connection, presence, and the life they were slowly rediscovering together. Later that afternoon, Luke offered to help with the ranch work. Emily watched him handle the cattle with skill and confidence, impressed by how much he had grown into a capable, strong man. He repaired broken fence posts with careful hands, mended sections of the fence with precision, and even joked when a stubborn nail wouldn't fit, making her laugh as she hadn't in years. It was comforting to see him in his element, working alongside her, blending the old memories with new experiences. "Do you remember the summer we tried to build that treehouse?" Emily asked as they paused for water. Luke laughed, a deep, rich sound. "How could I forget? We thought we could build the greatest fort anyone had ever seen. I think it collapsed before we even finished the first wall." They laughed together, the sound echoing across the fields. Emily realized that laughter, memories, and shared work had a way of knitting hearts back together after long separations. Every gesture, every conversation, every small act of care helped to rebuild the bond that had never truly been broken, no matter how long the years of silence had lasted. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting golden light over the fields, Emily and Luke paused to admire the horizon. The wind stirred through the tall grass, and the fence caught the sunlight in a way that made it look almost alive. Emily's heart swelled with a mix of emotions: relief, joy, gratitude, and cautious optimism. The reunion was only the beginning. They had 10 years of distance to bridge, stories to share, and new memories to create, but the first step had been taken, and it felt like walking into sunlight after a long winter. They sat together on a worn bench near the barn, sharing silence for a few moments. Emily rested her head lightly on Luke's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. The years of waiting had not been wasted. They had prepared her for this moment, making her patient, resilient, and appreciative of the depth of love that could endure absence. "Luke," she whispered, "I was afraid you might never come back. I was afraid I'd spend my life waiting for someone who didn't remember me anymore." He turned to look at her, eyes soft and full of understanding. "I remember you every single day, Emily. Even when I was far away, even when I couldn't reach you, you were always with me. And now that I'm back, I'll never leave like that again." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, joy, and love that had waited 10 years to be expressed. She leaned closer, letting the weight of the past lift slightly from her shoulders, feeling the warmth and presence of the man she had always hoped would return. The rest of the day was spent in quiet companionship. They repaired the last section of the fence together, Luke showing her a few tricks he had learned while working on ranches far away. Emily laughed at his small jokes, teased him gently, and felt a closeness that had been missing for so long. Each nail hammered, each piece of wood fitted, became a metaphor for rebuilding their connection, reinforcing the trust and love that had endured the years apart. As evening approached, they stood together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The sky blazed with shades of gold, orange, and pink, and Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known for years. The silence that had haunted her was finally giving way to words, to presence, and to the warmth of a love that had survived time, distance, and uncertainty. Luke reached for her hand, holding it gently as the wind played through their hair. "Emily," he said softly, "we have a lot of catching up to do, but I promise I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Emily smiled, her heart full. "I believe you, Luke. And I've waited for this. I've waited for you." They watched the first stars appear in the sky, the soft evening light painting the fence and fields in a gentle glow. For the first time in 10 years, Emily felt that the waiting, the longing, and the hope had not been in vain. The reunion was more than a moment. It was the start of rebuilding, of rediscovering each other, and of beginning a new chapter together. Emily Dawson realized that love, true love, could withstand distance, silence, and time. It required patience, courage, and belief, but it had a way of returning when it was meant to. And now, with Luke by her side, she could finally breathe, laugh, and imagine a future that had been paused for too long. The fence, the fields, and the golden sunsets were no longer just memories. They were a living, breathing part of their story, and together they would create new memories, stronger and brighter than ever before. As night fell over the Dawson Ranch, Emily and Luke sat together, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams. The wind whispered through the fields, the stars shimmered above, and the fence stood as a silent witness to the bond that had endured 10 years of waiting. Emily knew that the road ahead would have challenges, but she also knew that with patience, love, and shared effort, they could face anything. And for the first time in a decade, she felt completely at peace. The days that followed Luke Harper's return were filled with quiet joy and steady rediscovery. Emily Dawson felt the weight of 10 years of waiting begin to lift, replaced by a warmth she hadn't experienced in so long. Each morning, she would wake and see him there, working beside her on the ranch, walking along the fence, or simply sharing breakfast on the porch as the sun painted the fields golden. The presence she had dreamed of for a decade was now tangible, real, and life felt unexpectedly bright. At first, it was small things, Luke helping with chores, mending fences, carrying water buckets, and checking the cattle. Emily watched him move across the fields with ease, confident and capable, yet with a gentleness that reminded her of the boy he had once been. She realized how much she had missed having him nearby, not just as a memory, but as a living, breathing companion. Every shared task, every shared glance brought them closer, and the past years of absence no longer felt like a barrier but a bridge they were crossing together. One afternoon, as the sun began to lower toward the horizon, they walked along the length of the fence, their hands brushing occasionally. Emily looked out over the fields, the golden light shimmering across the land, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I never imagined this would happen," she said softly, almost to herself. "I never thought you would come back, Luke, yet here you are." Luke turned to her, his eyes soft and tender. "I promised I'd come back, Emily. I always intended to keep that promise. I'm here now, and I want to make things right, not just with you, but with us." His words carried the sincerity and depth she had longed to hear for so many years. They paused near the corner of the ranch where the old oak tree stood, the same tree where their initials had been carved a decade ago. Luke ran his hand over the faded letters, and Emily could see the reflection of their shared past in his eyes. "You kept everything so alive," he said. "I was afraid you'd forget me, but you never did." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never could forget you, Luke. You were a part of my life before, during, and even after you left. The memories, the laughter, the love, it all stayed with me." She placed her hand gently on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "And now that you're here, I feel complete again." Luke took a deep breath and nodded. "I feel the same way. The years apart were hard, but they taught me how much I truly love you, Emily. And now I want to spend every day making up for lost time." From that day forward, they settled into a rhythm together. Luke helped with the farm work, learning the routines and adding his own energy and care to each task. Emily showed him the changes she had made to the ranch over the years, proudly pointing out repaired fences, freshly planted gardens, and neat stacks of firewood. They laughed together when things went wrong, the time a stubborn calf refused to move, or when a fence post broke under their weight. Each mistake and each small victory became a shared experience, strengthening their bond and reminding them that life, though unpredictable, was better when faced together. Evenings were a time for reflection and conversation. They would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, talking about their dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Emily shared her worries about running the ranch alone, her doubts about whether she could manage it, and Luke offered reassurance, encouragement, and quiet confidence. They planned together, small plans at first, like tending the garden, painting the barn, and fixing old equipment, and larger plans for the future, like rebuilding parts of the ranch and restoring the land to its full potential. As days turned into weeks, the emotional distance that had existed for 10 years melted away. They revisited the fields where they had once played as children, laughed under the old oak tree, and even rode horses together, recalling the times when they had raced through the fields, carefree and young. Emily noticed that her heart no longer ached with longing. Instead, it throbbed with a quiet, steady joy, the joy of being seen, understood, and loved by someone who had returned when she had needed him most. One quiet evening, after a long day of repairing fences and tending the fields, they stood together by the edge of the ranch. The sun had painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and gold, and the air was cool with the promise of night. Luke turned to Emily, his eyes holding the depth of everything he had felt over the years. "Emily," he said softly, "I've missed you more than I can ever explain, and I want you to know I'm not leaving again. I want to build a life with you here where we belong together." Emily felt tears well up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of happiness, of relief, of fulfillment. "Luke, I've waited for you, dreamed of you, and hoped for you for 10 years, and now that you're here, I know it was worth it. We'll face everything together, and I couldn't be happier." They embraced, a long, gentle hug that spoke more than words ever could. The fence, the fields, the golden sunset, all of it seemed to witness the reunion that had once been only a dream. Emily realized that the years of waiting had not been wasted. Each day of hope, patience, and quiet perseverance had led to this moment, and she felt stronger, wiser, and more certain of her heart than ever before. As the night settled over the ranch, stars twinkling above like tiny beacons, they sat together, wrapped in blankets, sharing stories and dreams. Luke spoke of the future he imagined for them, of rebuilding the ranch, exploring nearby towns, and creating a home filled with love, laughter, and hope. Emily shared her own dreams, her desire to nurture the land, and her hope for a life that honored both their past and their present. They laughed, planned, and sometimes fell into comfortable silence, simply enjoying the presence of each other. Days passed, blending into weeks, and their connection deepened. They celebrated small joys, harvests from the garden, successful repairs, and the occasional visit from neighbors who were thrilled to see them together. The town began to notice the change in Emily. Her eyes sparkled more brightly, her laughter was freer, and her steps carried a lightness she hadn't felt in years. People who had once worried about her loneliness now saw her happiness reflected in the warmth of their reunion. One afternoon, as they repaired a section of the fence near the far edge of the ranch, Emily paused to rest, leaning against the wood. Luke approached, wiping sweat from his brow, and offered her a hand. "You know," he said with a small grin, "this fence has seen a lot of years, and now it's witnessing something even better, us together making a life." Emily smiled, taking his hand. "It's more than a fence now, Luke. It's a symbol of hope, of patience, and of love that survives even the longest silence." They worked side by side until the sun dipped low, painting the fields in a soft amber glow. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts full. Emily knew that the years of silence, the waiting, and the longing had all been part of their journey. She realized that hope was a powerful force, one that could endure absence, overcome distance, and eventually bring back what was meant to return. Luke's presence was proof of that hope, and together they could face the future with strength, courage, and unwavering love. One night under the stars, Luke spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of truth and promise. "Emily, I don't want to spend another day apart. The past 10 years, I regret them, but I can't change them. What I can do is be here now, and I promise to be here for every day ahead." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heart and the warmth of his presence. "I've waited, Luke. And now I know it was worth it. The years taught me patience, hope, and the value of love that lasts. We'll face everything together now." In the days that followed, they continued to rebuild not just the ranch, but their lives together. They repaired fences, tended gardens, and nurtured the land. They revisited old memories, laughed, and shared stories that had been left untold. Every day was a step forward, every small act of care a brick in the foundation of the life they would share. Emily Dawson realized, finally, that the years of silence had been a preparation. They had taught her the strength of patience, the endurance of love, and the beauty of hope. The fence, once a reminder of absence, now stood as a symbol of reunion, resilience, and the promise of a future filled with love. Luke Harper had returned, and her waiting had ended. Together they faced the horizon, hearts aligned, ready for whatever life would bring, knowing that some bonds, no matter how long interrupted, could endure anything. The golden fields stretched out before them, the fence standing tall and steadfast, and the evening sky shimmered with stars. Emily took Luke's hand, feeling the steady warmth of his presence, and smiled. Life had come full circle, and the love she had held onto for so long had finally found its way home.